For a whole week, I couldn't get in touch with my parents, so I decided to drive back to visit them, gripped by unease. When I arrived, the front door was ajar and the house inside was in chaos, as if a storm had torn through it. Trembling, I was about to leave when I suddenly heard labored breathing and faint sobbing coming from the wardrobe. As I opened the door, my little nephew collapsed into my arms, exhausted. He didn't say a word, but his silence unveiled a horrifying truth I had never dared to imagine. Hello, my name is Jackson Palmer. I'm 31 years old and currently manage a small but bustling hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada, the city of lights and fleeting dreams. From the outside, my life seems stable. A good job, a tidy apartment, and a busy schedule that keeps me from overthinking. But if you ask me about my family, about my memories of Reno, where I grew up, you'll hear a different story, one filled with cracks, lingering pain and love that I struggle to express. I was born and raised in Reno, a small town nestled among Nevada's mountains where everyone knows each other, and life moves at a slow, almost unchanging pace. My father, Joseph, and my mother, Marilyn, were typical townsfolk, hardworking, simple, and always putting family first. They ran a small grocery store on Main Street, where as a young child I grew accustomed to standing behind the counter bagging groceries, or restocking cans of soup on the shelves. It was a modest, weathered store with a faded wooden sign and the scent of freshly baked bread mingling with the musty smell of the wooden floor. I loved that place. Not because it was special, but because it was my entire world back then. Our family home was a few blocks from the store, a 2-story house with a front yard full of weeds and an old oak tree I used to climb every summer. That's where I grew up, where I learned to tie my shoes, where I heard my mother's lullabies, and where I witnessed both my parents' smiles and their tears. But if you think we were a perfectly happy family, you'd be mistaken. Despite moments of warmth, our family was always overshadowed by a looming presence. The shadow named Dylan, my younger brother. Dylan was 5 years younger than me, but from a young age he was the center of attention in our household. My mother called him her golden boy, with his curly hair and sparkling eyes. Dylan had a smile that could melt anyone, and my parents, especially my mother, couldn't resist him. They spoiled him, giving him whatever he wanted, new toys, nice clothes, or forgiveness for his mistakes. Meanwhile, as the older son, I was expected to be mature and responsible, while Dylan was allowed to live carefree as if his missteps were just harmless pranks. I don't blame my parents. I know they loved both of us, just in different ways. I remember evenings at the store when I stayed behind to clean up while Dylan was taken out for ice cream by Mom. Or the times I got scolded for breaking a glass, while Dylan could spill an entire tray of pastries and only get a pat on the head. Those small things piling up over the years made Dylan and me grow up like parallel lines, living under the same roof but never truly connecting. When I was 18, I left Reno to attend college in Las Vegas. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like I could live for myself. I studied business administration, landed a good job at a hotel, and slowly built a new life. But every time I returned to Reno, I felt a heaviness in the air. Dylan, now a teenager, was changing. The angelic smile from his childhood was now tinged with defiance and recklessness. He started skipping school, hanging out with a bad crowd, and then, like an inevitable storm, he fell into gambling. Gambling in Nevada is hardly unusual. It's everywhere, from slot machines in supermarkets to the glitzy casinos of Las Vegas. But for Dylan, it wasn't just a pastime. It was an addiction. I remember the first time my mother called me, her voice trembling, saying Dylan had stolen money from the store's safe to gamble. I drove back that night, only to find my father sitting silently in his chair and my mother sobbing in the kitchen. Dylan, meanwhile, just shrugged and said, "I'll pay it back, no big deal." But I knew he wouldn't. He never did. The debts kept piling up and Dylan sank deeper. He married a woman named Sutton, someone I thought might pull him out of the abyss. But their marriage lasted less than 2 years. Sutton left, leaving Dylan and their young son Jaden, who was only 3 at the time. Instead of stepping up to care for his son, Dylan abandoned him, leaving Jaden with my parents while he drifted like a gust of wind, showing up occasionally to beg for money, cause trouble, and then disappear again. Jaden, now 6 years old, is the one thing that still brings a bit of light to our family. Every time I visit Reno, I spend time with him, telling him stories or just sitting together on the porch watching cars pass by. Jaden has eyes like Dylan's when he was young, but far more innocent and pure. He calls me Uncle Jax and hugs me tightly whenever I'm about to leave. But even Jaden can't erase the growing distance between me and my parents. Our relationship has been fractured for a long time. It's not that I don't love them. I do, deeply. But their favoritism toward Dylan and the burdens they placed on me whenever he messed up have worn me down. Every time my mother called, I braced myself for another rant about Dylan, about his debts, his troublemaking. And each time I felt drained and helpless. Last month, my mother called more frequently than usual. Her voice was frail, filled with worry. "Dylan came by again," she said. "He demanded money and brought some strangers with him. I don't know what to do." I told her to call the police if Dylan caused trouble, but she just sighed. "He's my son. I can't do that." I hung up, my heart heavy. I knew she wouldn't do anything. She never did. I thought about going back to Reno, confronting Dylan, or even bringing Jaden to live with me in Las Vegas. But work swept me away, and I told myself everything would be fine, that my parents could handle it. I was wrong, terribly wrong. For the past week, a sense of unease has been creeping into my heart, like a cold wind blowing through the blazing summer days of Las Vegas. It started with unanswered calls. I called my mom, then my dad, but all I got was the endless ringing, as if the sound was echoing in an empty void. I sent texts one after another with simple questions. "Mom, are you okay? Dad, what are you up to? How's Jaden doing?" But my phone screen remained silent, not a single reply. At first, I reassured myself that maybe my parents were busy, maybe they were at the store, or maybe their phones had died. But as the third day passed, then the fifth, that unease was no longer a fleeting breeze. It had turned into a storm, raging in my chest. I tried not to overthink, but every night, as the neon lights of Las Vegas flickered outside my window, I found myself clutching my phone, scrolling through the unanswered messages, my heart heavy. I thought of my dad with his tall, lean frame and eyes always filled with quiet exhaustion but steadfast patience. I thought of my mom, with her gentle smile but a voice growing weaker every time she mentioned Dylan. And then I thought of Jaden, the 6-year-old with big, round eyes, probably sitting somewhere in that Reno house, clutching his worn-out teddy bear. I wondered, what's going on? Are my parents okay? My mother's calls about Dylan's incessant disruptions, showing up with strangers in tow, had left me with a gnawing sense of dread. Dylan wasn't just asking for money anymore. He had changed, becoming more aggressive, more reckless. Mom told me he'd show up at odd hours, sometimes in the middle of the night, banging on the door, yelling for money to pay off debts. Once she said he even threatened to make a big deal if they didn't comply. I wanted to race back to Reno right then, to grab Dylan by the collar and scream that he had no right to torment our parents like that. But I held myself back, telling myself I couldn't keep cleaning up my brother's messes forever. I was wrong. My biggest mistake was thinking I could stay on the sidelines, that I could let my parents face the storm named Dylan alone. By the 7th day, with still no response from my parents, a call from an unfamiliar number made my heart pound. It was Mrs. Helen, the neighbor who lived across from my parents' grocery store. Her voice was frantic, laced with worry. "Jackson, I need to tell you something. Your parents' store has been closed all week. No one's seen them. I tried calling, but no one picks up. Something's not right, Jackson." I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. The grocery store, the place my parents had poured their lives into, had never been closed for more than 2 days, except during major holidays. For it to be shuttered for a whole week was unimaginable. I hung up, my hands trembling, trying to piece my thoughts together. Maybe my parents were sick. Maybe they went on a trip. But deep down I knew those were just excuses to soothe myself. Dylan, had he done something? Had he pushed my parents into a situation they couldn't escape? I couldn't sit still any longer. That evening I called my boss and requested emergency leave. "I need to go home, it's urgent," I said, my voice choking, though I didn't explain much. My boss, a kind but perpetually busy man, simply nodded over the phone and told me to be careful. I packed a few clothes, tossed them into a small suitcase, and before leaving my apartment, I glanced out the window, where the Las Vegas lights still twinkled, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. A 7-hour drive from Las Vegas to Reno lay ahead, and I knew this trip wasn't just about finding my parents. It was about facing everything I'd been avoiding for years. As I got into the car, started the engine, and began the journey, childhood memories flooded back, vivid as if they'd happened yesterday. I remembered afternoons behind the store counter, when Dad taught me how to count change for customers, or when Mom slipped a peppermint candy from the shelf into my hand. I remembered the smell of the old wooden floors, the jingle of the bell when customers walked in, and the times Dylan and I as kids played tag between the aisles, laughing until Mom pretended to scold us. But those memories, no matter how warm, couldn't ease the dread suffocating my chest. Every time the car passed through a dark stretch of road, I saw Dylan's image. Not the Dylan from back then, but the Dylan of now, with cold eyes, a harsh voice, and the threats Mom had described. I wondered, what had happened in that house? Were my parents truly okay, or was something far worse waiting for me in Reno? With every mile, my fear grew, like a stone weighing heavier on my heart. I turned on the radio, trying to find a song to drown out the silence, but no melody could overpower the whisper in my head. "Jackson, you've abandoned them for too long." I pressed the gas pedal, the car speeding toward Reno, toward the house that held both my childhood and my wounds. The 7-hour drive felt like a lifetime. When the town's welcome sign came into view, my chest tightened as if it were being squeezed. The town looked the same, with its familiar streets and houses peeking out under the moonlight. But something felt off, as if the air carried a warning. I drove straight to my parents' grocery store, a place I always thought would be lit up, filled with laughter. But when I pulled up in front of it, I could hardly believe my eyes. The store was completely shuttered. The wooden sign reading Palmer's Grocery still hung there, but it was faded and tilted, as if it too was weary from witnessing whatever had happened. Through the window, I saw only darkness, no light, no sign of life. The shelves I used to neatly stock were now swallowed by shadows. My heart raced, and I had to take deep breaths to keep from panicking. My parents would never close the store for this long. Never. Unless... I didn't dare finish the thought. I started the car again and drove toward their house a few blocks away. The familiar road that once led me through carefree summer days now seemed endless. Every street corner, every old oak tree stirred memories. Dylan and me running around, Mom calling us in for dinner from the porch, Dad reading the newspaper in his armchair. But now those memories only deepened my unease. I didn't know what I was about to face, but a bad feeling clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. When I pulled up to the familiar 2-story house, my heart seemed to stop. The house was pitch black, not a single light in the windows, not a sound. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. I stepped out of the car, my legs heavy as lead, each step feeling like it was leading me toward an abyss. I called out, "Dad? Mom? Jaden?" But only the wind answered, cold and lifeless. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, and the sight before me hit like a punch to the chest. The house, once filled with laughter, the smell of Mom's freshly baked cookies and Jaden's babbling stories, was now a wreck. The furniture in the living room was toppled as if swept by a storm. The kitchen cabinet doors hung open, dishes scattered across the floor, some cups shattered into sharp fragments. A long crack ran across the wall, as if something had been slammed against it. A wooden chair, one Dad had proudly built himself, lay broken with a missing leg. Everything screamed chaos, as if the house had witnessed a battle. I stood there in the living room, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. "Dad? Mom?" I called again, my voice hoarse, but the thick silence enveloped me like a heavy blanket pressing down on my chest. I stepped forward, tripping over a spoon lying on the floor. Each step felt like a knife twisting in my heart because I knew no one would leave the house like this by accident. Not Dad, who always kept everything in order. Not Mom, who polished the floors until they gleamed. And certainly not Jaden, the careful little boy who cherished everything around him. I tried to gather my thoughts to find a rational explanation. Maybe they'd been robbed. Maybe they'd fled in a panic. Or maybe something had happened to them. Something I didn't dare imagine. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. I needed to find my parents, to find Jaden. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the police, but at that moment a faint sound came from the end of the hallway, from my parents' bedroom. A shaky, labored breath mixed with soft, stifled sobs like a small animal trying to hide. My heart pounded, blood rushing to my ears. I froze, listening, trying to determine if I'd imagined it. But then it came again, clearer, more desperate. I moved toward the bedroom, my legs trembling. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, a musty smell and cold silence hit me. My parents' bed was untouched, but the blankets were disheveled, as if someone had lain there and left in a hurry. I called out for Jaden, my voice breaking. "Jaden? Is that you? Where are you?" There was no reply, only the labored breathing, now clearer, coming from the corner of the room. I followed the sound, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The breathing led me to the old wardrobe, its door slightly open. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, sweat beading on my forehead. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but fear clung to me relentlessly. I whispered, as if to reassure myself, "It's going to be okay, Jackson. Just open the door." But deep down I knew nothing was okay. The wardrobe door creaked sharply as I pulled it open, the sound slicing through the room's silence. The darkness inside swallowed the faint light from the hallway. But then, amid the jumble of hanging clothes and the musty smell of old wood, I saw a small figure curled up in the corner. My eyes strained to adjust, and when the light finally fell on it, I froze. It was Jaden, my 6-year-old nephew, with those clear eyes I'd always cherished. But now, he was no longer the Jaden I knew. He sat huddled, clutching his tattered teddy bear, the one my mother had given him when he was a baby. His clothes were crumpled and filthy, as if he'd been wearing them for a week. His hair was matted, sticking to his forehead, and his face was gaunt and pale, as if hunger had drained the life out of him. But what shattered my heart was his eyes, red-rimmed, wide open, gleaming with a fear I'd never seen in a child. He wasn't crying loudly, just soft, choked sobs, as if he'd cried so much he had no strength left. "Jaden!" I called, my voice breaking, barely recognizable to myself. I knelt down, reaching out to touch him, but he flinched, shrinking deeper into the corner as if I were a threat. The teddy bear was clutched so tightly I feared it might tear. "Jaden, it's Uncle Jax." "You're safe now," I said, my voice trembling, trying to stay calm even though my heart was screaming. But Jaden didn't respond. He just stared at me, his panicked eyes searching for something to trust, something to hold on to. Slowly, I reached out again, gently touching his shoulder. This time he didn't pull away, but his body shook violently, like a dry leaf in a cold wind. "Buddy, what happened?" "Where are Grandma and Grandpa?" I asked, my voice catching, fighting back tears. I needed to know. I needed to understand why the house was in ruins, why my parents weren't here, and why Jaden was hiding in a wardrobe like a wounded animal. But Jaden said nothing. He just stared, his red eyes wide, and then, as if his last bit of strength had given out, he collapsed into my arms. His small body felt weightless, so frail I was afraid a tight hug might break him. I held him close, feeling his rapid breaths against my shoulder. And in that moment, a pain deeper than anything I'd ever known washed over me. This boy, my beloved nephew, had endured something horrific, and I, the one who should have protected him, hadn't been there when he needed me most. I lifted Jaden, his body limp in my arms. "It's okay, I'm here now," I whispered, unsure if I was comforting him or myself. I scanned the room again, hoping for any sign of my parents, a note, a clue, anything. But there was only silence and chaos. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like an abandoned battlefield. I couldn't stay any longer. Jaden needed help, and I had to get him out of this place. I carried him to the car, laid him on the back seat, and wrapped him in a thin blanket I found on the couch. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling faintly as if he were clinging to life. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the car, and sped toward the nearest hospital, my heart pounding as if it might burst. The 10-minute drive to the hospital felt like a century. I kept glancing at Jaden in the rearview mirror, terrified he might slip away completely. "Hang on, buddy," I muttered, my voice breaking. "I won't let anything happen to you." But in my mind, questions swirled like sharp blades. Where were my parents? What had happened in that house? When I pulled up to the emergency room, I practically shouted for the nurses. "Help! My nephew! He's not okay!" A team of doctors and nurses rushed over, wheeling a stretcher to the car. They gently lifted Jaden onto it, and I stood there helpless as they whisked him inside. A nurse, her eyes filled with concern but professional, asked me about Jaden's condition, but I could only shake my head, unable to answer clearly. I don't know. I just found him in a wardrobe. He hasn't said anything. Please, save him." In the emergency room, the doctors worked quickly. They hooked Jaden up to an IV, checked his heart rate, and measured his blood pressure, while I stood in the hallway watching through the small window in the door. Jaden lay there, so small and fragile, like a bird with broken wings. A doctor emerged, his face grave. "The boy is severely dehydrated and malnourished, likely from days without food or water," he said. "He's also experiencing significant psychological trauma. We'll keep him here for observation, but can you tell us anything about what happened?" I shook my head, overwhelmed by helplessness. "I don't know," I whispered. "I just got home and found him like that. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stop here." Jaden had survived, but what about my parents? The wrecked house, the signs of violence, the eerie silence. I clenched my fists, anger and pain surging like a fire. I had to go back to that house. I stood in the hospital hallway, peering through the small window on the emergency room door where Jaden lay. He looked heartbreakingly small, with IV tubes attached to his arm and his face still bearing traces of fear. The doctors said he'd be okay, but okay in this context felt like an empty word. I turned away, unable to bear the sight for another second. I had to act. I had to find my parents. I called a friend from the hotel, asking him to cover my work for a few days. "I don't know how long this will take," I said, my voice hollow. He didn't ask questions, just told me to take care of myself and promised to handle everything. I hung up, feeling like I was severing a piece of my normal life in Las Vegas to step into a nightmare with no end in sight. Back in the car, I drove to my parents' house. The Reno night was cold, and the faint moonlight cast an eerie glow on the familiar streets, making them feel alien. When I pulled up to the house, a chill ran down my spine. I stepped inside, careful not to touch anything. The house was as I'd left it. Furniture toppled, dishes shattered, the crack on the wall like a grim reminder of what had happened. I stood in the living room, breathing in the heavy air, searching for any clue, any sign to understand what had happened to my parents. I walked through each room, checking every corner but avoiding touching anything. I knew if something serious had occurred, the police would need the scene untouched. In the kitchen, I spotted a family photo frame on the floor. I looked down at the cracked glass, my heart clenching at the sight of my parents' smiles, mine, and even Dylan's from when we were kids. The photo was taken on a summer day when we were still a family before everything fell apart. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. "I need to report a missing persons case," I said when the dispatcher's voice came through. "My parents, they're not at home. And my nephew, I found him in critical condition. The house, It's been ransacked. Please come quickly." My voice choked, each word feeling like it was being wrenched from deep inside my chest. The dispatcher asked basic questions: address, my parents' names, the state of the scene, and I answered mechanically, my mind blank. They told me to wait, that the police would be there soon. I sat on the old sofa trying to stay calm, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I scanned the room, desperate for any clue. My dad's jacket hung on the coat rack, but its pockets were empty. In the kitchen, a cold cup of coffee sat on the table as if Dad had left it mid-sip. Everything in the house seemed to tell a story, but I couldn't decipher what it was saying. 15 minutes later, the red and blue lights of a patrol car flashed outside, illuminating the quiet street. I heard the car stop, the sound of hurried footsteps, and then the door swung open. 3 officers stepped inside, followed by a man in plain clothes, likely a detective. "Are you the one who called, Jackson Palmer?" the man asked, his voice low and steady. I nodded, standing up, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I'm Detective Matthew. Tell us what you know." I led them inside, showing them the scene: the broken chairs, shattered dishes, the crack on the wall. I told them about not being able to reach my parents for a week, about the neighbor's call, and about finding Jaden in the wardrobe. Each word felt like a stab, but I forced myself to keep going. Matthew took notes carefully, his eyes sharp but non-judgmental. "We'll look into everything," he said. "But first, we need to secure the scene." The officers began cordoning off the house with yellow tape, keeping anyone from getting too close. I stood on the porch watching as neighbors started to gather, their eyes a mix of curiosity and concern. Whispers floated through the crowd, and I caught fragments of their conversations. "I heard arguing last week," an elderly woman, Mrs. Carter, told an officer. "Loud shouting from inside the house. I thought it was Joseph and Marilyn arguing with someone." Another man, Mr. Thompson, chimed in. "I saw Dylan around here a few times. He was with some rough-looking guys. Once I saw them standing outside the store like they were watching something." Each word hit me like a hammer to the chest. I was both furious and desperate. Dylan. His name kept coming up like a refrain in a tragic song. I wanted to scream, to demand answers from every neighbor about what they'd seen or heard, but I knew I had to stay calm. The police needed me clear-headed, and Jaden needed me strong. Still, deep inside, a fear was growing like a snarling beast. If Dylan was involved, if he had done something to my parents, I didn't know how I'd face that truth. Matthew called me over, asking more questions about Dylan. Where he usually went, his habits, anything that could help. I told him everything I knew, though each word felt like rubbing salt in a wound. "He's addicted to gambling," I said. "He shows up to ask for money. My mom, she always forgave him no matter how much he hurt her." Matthew nodded, his eyes fixed on his notebook. "We'll start looking into this angle," he said. "But you should prepare yourself. This might not be a simple missing persons case." His words sent a shiver through me. I wanted to believe my parents were okay, that they'd just gone somewhere, that this was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth was waiting, and it wouldn't be easy. I turned away, heading back to the hospital where Jaden was. I needed to be with him. I hurried into the hospital, heading straight to Jaden's bedside. The doctors had been treating him with IV fluids for hours, and now he looked slightly better. His skin was no longer deathly pale as when I found him, but his eyes still carried a haunting shadow I couldn't forget. I stood by the bed watching him, my heart feeling like it was being crushed. "It's Uncle Jax," I whispered, gently touching his hand. "You're okay now." Jaden opened his eyes, those big, round, red-rimmed eyes locking onto mine. Then, as if a dam of fear had broken, he burst into wrenching sobs. His cries were raw, desperate, as if he'd been holding them in for too long. He reached out with his small hands, clinging to me, his fingers gripping my shirt as if afraid I'd vanish. "Uncle Jax, don't go," he whispered, his voice trembling and faint, so fragile I had to fight not to break down with him. I pulled him into my arms, feeling his tiny body tremble against me. "I'm right here, Jaden. I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice catching. But deep down, I knew I was making a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. A doctor came in to check on Jaden. "He's more stable now," she said, her tone gentle but serious. "But he's suffered severe psychological trauma. We need time to assess him further, and it's best not to pressure him right now." I nodded, but my mind was swirling with questions. Jaden knew something. He'd been in that house, had seen something. And though I didn't want to push him, I needed the truth. Detective Matthew arrived at the hospital shortly after, accompanied by a female officer whose eyes were kind but cautious. They asked me a few brief questions about Jaden's condition, then requested to speak with him. "We'll be as gentle as possible," Matthew said. "I know it's not the best time, but anything the boy can tell us might help find your parents." I looked at Jaden, still clinging to me, and felt like I was standing at a dangerous crossroads. I didn't want him to relive whatever had happened, but I also knew it was the only way to find my parents. "Jaden," I said, kneeling by the bed, keeping my voice as soft as possible, "can you help Uncle Jax a little? These people are police officers, and they want to find Grandma and Grandpa. Can you tell us what happened?" Jaden shook his head frantically, his eyes wide with fear. He clutched his teddy bear tightly as if it were his last shield. "No, I don't want to," he whispered, his voice quivering. I hugged him, letting him rest his head on my shoulder. "I'm right here, Jaden. You don't have to be scared. Just tell us what you remember, okay? I won't let anyone hurt you." I could feel his rapid breathing, and in that moment I wanted nothing more than to take him away from all this pain. But I couldn't. I needed the truth, no matter how brutal. After a few minutes of my reassurance, Jaden began to speak, his voice halting and punctuated by sobs. Dad came to the house," he whispered, and my heart seemed to stop. "Dad came with some other people. They were yelling. Grandma and Grandpa yelled back." Jaden paused, his eyes wide, as if reliving the moment. I held his hand, trying to keep my voice steady. "Go on, buddy. What did they do?" Jaden trembled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Dad, he was really mad. He shouted, told Grandma and Grandpa to give him money, but they wouldn't. Then there was a loud crash. Things broke." He stopped, clutching the teddy bear, his body shaking violently. I was scared. I ran to the wardrobe. I hid. His voice faded, as if sinking into a memory too heavy to bear. I heard Grandma and Grandpa cry out. Then everything went quiet. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. I held Jaden tightly, fighting back tears, but inside a storm was raging. Dylan. He was there. He fought with our parents, and the sounds Jaden heard, I didn't dare think further. Matthew and the female officer took notes quickly, their expressions hardening. "Do you remember anything about the people with your dad?" the officer asked, her voice gentle but careful. Jaden shook his head, tears spilling again. "I don't know. They were tall. They were scary, covered in tattoos." He broke into wrenching sobs, clinging to me, and I knew he couldn't say more. I signaled to Matthew, and he nodded, standing up. "Thank you, Jaden," he said. "You're a brave boy. We have enough to start the investigation, and Dylan will be our primary suspect." The doctor stepped in, gently asking everyone to leave so Jaden could rest. "The boy needs time," she said. "He's been through too much." I nodded, but inside I wanted to scream. Dylan, my brother, what had he done? What had he dragged our parents into? And Jaden, an innocent child, had witnessed it all. I sat by Jaden's bed, holding his hand until he fell asleep, his breathing finally steady. But I couldn't rest. Jaden's words were like a sharp puzzle piece, confirming my worst fears. Dylan hadn't just caused trouble. He might have done something unforgivable. Detective Matthew called me the next morning, his voice low and resolute. "We've designated Dylan as the primary suspect based on Jaden's statement," he said. "We're issuing a manhunt and checking every place he might show up. Do you have any more information about your brother's habits?" I recounted what I knew. The casinos Dylan frequented, the seedy bars where he drank. Each word felt like a stab, but I couldn't stop. The police moved quickly. They went to the rundown motel room Dylan rented on the outskirts of Reno. But when Matthew called with an update, his voice was heavy with frustration. The room was empty, he said. Trash strewn everywhere, clothes scattered like he left in a hurry. We're collecting fingerprints and any clues we can find. I pictured the room, a chaotic mess reeking of alcohol and cigarettes, a reflection of the person Dylan had become. He'd fled. He knew what he'd done and he was trying to escape. Meanwhile, I sat by Jaden's side watching him sleep, his face still etched with fear. The doctors said he needed time to recover, but every time he startled in his sleep, muttering incoherent words, it felt like someone was squeezing my heart. I stroked his hair, whispering, "I'm here, Jaden." Everything's going to be okay, but I wasn't sure if I was comforting him or myself. The truth was, I didn't know if things would ever be okay again. The police continued to track Dylan's trail. They visited the casinos and bars in Reno where he was a regular. A bartender at the Rusty Nail told Matthew that Dylan had shown up a few days ago, frantic, downing drinks and muttering about needing money fast. He looked like he was being hunted, the bartender said. Bloodshot eyes, constantly looking over his shoulder like he was scared of someone following him. Then he left without paying for his drinks. Those details sent a chill through me. Dylan wasn't just running. He was terrified. A key lead came from a creditor named Eddie, a man the police tracked down at a small casino outside town. Eddie, with a gravelly voice and cold eyes, said Dylan owed him tens of thousands of dollars from losing streaks at the tables. He begged me for more time, Eddie told Matthew as recounted later. Said he was about to come into big money to pay it all off. Mentioned something about family taking care of it, but I didn't buy it. He looked like a desperate stray dog. Eddie's words hit me like a hammer. Family taking care of it? What did Dylan mean? Was he planning to get money from our parents? From the grocery store? Or from something worse? The police issued a citywide manhunt for Dylan, extending it to surrounding areas. They sent alerts to checkpoints, casinos, and cheap motels where he might be hiding. News of the case began to spread like a small wildfire in the usually quiet town. Neighbors gathered outside my parents' house, whispering to each other, their eyes a mix of pity and curiosity. Mrs. Carter, the elderly neighbor, visited me and Jaden at the hospital, bringing a tin of homemade cookies. "I can't believe this, Jackson," she said, her voice trembling. "Joseph and Marilyn were good people. And Dylan? I saw him with some shady characters. I was worried, but I never thought it would come to this." Her words only fueled the fire in my chest. I wanted to scream that I didn't want to believe it either, that I didn't want to think my brother could do something horrific to our own parents. But the pieces were falling into place. Jaden's account, the wrecked house, the neighbors' stories, and now Eddie's words. They all pointed to Dylan like arrows aimed straight at my heart. I sat by Jaden, holding his hand, feeling his small, cold fingers in my palm. He was still sleeping, but his sleep was restless. Occasionally, he mumbled words like, "Dad, don't," or "I'm scared." Each whisper cut into me like a blade. I thought about the years Dylan was coddled, defended by Mom, forgiven by Dad. I thought about the times I tried to pull him out of his mess, only for him to smirk and say, "Worry about yourself, Jax. I know how to live my life." Now his way of living had led to this: a destroyed home, a traumatized child, and our parents missing. I looked out the hospital window at the moonlight illuminating Reno's rooftops. Somewhere out there, Dylan was hiding, carrying secrets I both yearned and dreaded to uncover. I hoped the police would find him, drag him out of the shadows to face what he'd done. But at the same time, I feared that moment. When I faced Dylan, what would I see? A criminal? A brother? Or a monster who had destroyed our family? Matthew called again late that night, his voice firm but steady. "We're narrowing it down," he said. "We've got new leads from the outskirts. We'll find him soon." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Thank you," I said, my voice hollow. I wasn't sure if I was truly ready to face Dylan or not. The next morning, Matthew called me back to the house to review some findings from the investigation team. "We need you to confirm a few details," he said over the phone, his voice carrying an odd tone, as if he were bracing himself for something grave. I didn't ask questions, just drove over, my heart pounding in my chest. When I stepped inside, Matthew was in the living room, joined by another officer taking photos of the scene. The house remained as I remembered it. Wrecked, cold, like a wound that refused to heal. "We've done a more thorough search," Matthew said, leading me to the corner where Dad used to work. His desk, an old wooden piece scratched by time, stood there silently as if guarding a secret. "We found this in the drawer," Matthew said, handing me a faded yellow envelope, its edges worn. I took the envelope, my hands trembling. My name was scrawled across it in Dad's handwriting, a script I'd recognize anywhere. "Jackson," it read, and just seeing it sent a chill down my spine. I opened the envelope, pulling out a folded sheet of paper, the handwriting shaky as if written in panic or fear. I took a deep breath, trying to steel myself, but nothing could prepare me for what I was about to read. "Jackson, our son," the letter began. "If you're reading this, things have probably gone too far. We're sorry for everything. We were wrong, so very wrong, to let Dylan become what he is. We loved him, but we spoiled him too much, letting him grow into a selfish, broken man. We tried to fix it, but it might be too late." I stopped, feeling like I couldn't breathe. The words cut like a sharp, unrelenting knife. I knew my parents had always defended Dylan, forgiven his mistakes. But hearing them admitted in their own handwriting filled me with both pain and anger. I forced myself to read on, each line slicing deeper. "Dylan has changed, Jackson. He's no longer the boy we knew. Lately, he's been coming to the house often, demanding money, threatening us. He talked about selling the grocery store, saying it was the only way to settle his debts. We refused, but he wouldn't stop. He brought strangers, men with cold eyes. We've been living in fear, Jackson. We're afraid of the day things go too far." Tears welled up, blurring the words. I thought I was prepared, but no, there was no way to brace for this. My parents had lived in fear, threatened by their own son, and they chose to keep it from me. A wave of anger surged, anger at Dylan, at myself, and even at my parents for letting it come to this. The letter continued, Dad's handwriting growing heavier, as if he knew time was running out. "We didn't want to drag you into this, Jackson. You've done so much for this family, carried so much. We didn't want you to face Dylan, didn't want you caught up in this. But if you're reading this, we're probably gone. Take care of Jaden. He's innocent. And please forgive us if you can." I folded the letter, unable to read further. Tears fell hot on my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. The words felt like a final testament, as if my parents knew a tragic end was coming. They'd been pushed to the edge by their own son, and they'd chosen to protect me no matter the cost. I gripped the letter, feeling it burn in my hand. Matthew stood beside me, his eyes softening. But he said nothing, as if knowing I needed time to process what I'd read. "Dylan," I whispered, my voice breaking. His name now felt like a curse, an indelible stain. He'd driven our parents to the brink, and I could no longer stand on the sidelines. I handed the letter to Matthew, my voice trembling. "Keep it. It's evidence." He nodded, carefully placing it in a clear plastic bag, but his eyes told me he understood. This wasn't just evidence, but a piece of my family's tragedy. I returned to the hospital right after, unable to bear another second in that house. Jaden was still sleeping, his face less pale now. The letter's words echoed in my mind, each one a reminder of my parents' mistakes, and my own. I'd left them alone too long, thinking distance would shield me from Dylan's chaos. But now I couldn't run anymore. Dylan had destroyed our family, and I had to face him, no matter how brutal the truth might be. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. It was Matthew. His voice was curt, but I could hear the tension in it. "We found Dylan," he said. He's at a cheap motel on the outskirts. We've taken him into custody. Would you like to come to the station? My heart pounded, a mix of relief and dread surging through me. They'd found him. I left Jaden at the hospital under the nurse's care, promising to return soon. He clutched my hand, his eyes still filled with panic, but I forced a smile, though it felt dry and strained. I'll be back soon, Jaden, I said, ruffling his hair. But as I stepped out of the room, I felt like I was walking into a storm. The Reno police station sat in the heart of town, a gray building with long corridors and the stale smell of old coffee. Matthew met me at the entrance, his expression stern but tinged with exhaustion. He's in the interrogation room, he said, leading me through a narrow hallway. He's rattled but still denying everything. We need you here to confirm some details. I nodded, though inside I wanted to turn and run from this moment. But I couldn't. Not now. The interrogation room was small, with a metal table and stiff chairs. Dylan sat there, facing Matthew and another officer. I stood behind the one-way glass, watching him through the cold pane. He looked haggard, a shadow of himself. His hair was disheveled, his shirt crumpled, and his bloodshot eyes suggested days without sleep. In his hand was a small bag containing some cash and fake IDs, clear signs he'd planned to flee. But what chilled me was his eyes, panicked, yet still defiant, as if he thought he could still escape. Matthew began the interrogation, his voice calm but sharp. Dylan, we know you were at your parents' house last week. We have statements from your son, from neighbors, and from a creditor. What did you do? Dylan kept his head down, his hands clasped tightly, but his mouth stayed stubborn. I just went to ask for money, he said, his voice hoarse. We argued, sure, but then I left. I didn't do anything. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until they stung. He was lying. I knew it, Matthew knew it, and the room itself seemed to know it. Matthew didn't flinch. He placed a stack of documents on the table, including my parents' letter and photos of the wrecked house. You sure about that, Dylan? He asked, his voice cold as steel. Jaden said you came with some men. You fought with your parents and he heard things breaking, loud crashes. How do you explain that? Dylan shifted in his seat, his eyes darting away. The kid's making it up, he muttered, but his voice trembled as if he knew he was losing ground. Matthew pressed on, his tone growing sharper. We also have a statement from Eddie, your creditor. He said you promised big money to pay off your debts. Where was that money coming from, Dylan? Your parents' store? Their house? I stood behind the glass, feeling the ground crumble beneath me. Each of Matthew's words was a puzzle piece, forming a horrifying picture. Dylan bowed his head, silent, but I could see his shoulders trembling. He was breaking, and I both wanted to scream at him and run from what I was about to hear. Suddenly, Matthew's phone buzzed. He answered, his calm demeanor darkening instantly. The room fell silent as he nodded a few times, then hung up. Matthew stood, his voice dropping, each word heavy like a hammer strike. Dylan, I just got a call. The crime scene team found the bodies of Joseph and Marilyn Palmer in a vacant lot not far from their house. Both were brutally attacked. Evidence at the scene matches what we found in the house and Jaden's statement. Do you have anything left to deny? I felt the world stop. Bodies. My parents. I gripped the chair's edge, my head spinning. Their letter, with its trembling words, now became an unbearable truth. I wanted to scream, to shatter the glass and grab Dylan, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, tears streaming down my face without me noticing. Dylan looked up, his face pale as death. No, it wasn't me, he stammered, but his voice faltered as if he didn't believe his own lie. Matthew didn't give him a chance. He slid photos of the crime scene across the table on his phone, images I knew I couldn't bear to see, but I knew they were real. Anything else to say, Dylan? Matthew asked, his voice now a razor's edge. Dylan broke down, his sobs echoing in the small room. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. And then, as if his last strength had drained away, he confessed. I didn't mean to, he said, his voice breaking. I just wanted money. I needed it to pay my debts. But they wouldn't give it to me, they yelled, called me a disgrace. I lost control. I hit them. I didn't know what I was doing until they were lying there, not moving. I felt my heart tear apart. Dylan, my brother, once Mom's golden boy, had beaten our parents to death. He continued, his voice trembling as if trying to justify his crime. I panicked. I called some guys from the casino. We buried them in the lot. I thought if no one knew, I could sell the store, the house, pay off my debts, and start over. The room was stunned. Matthew kept his face stoic, but I saw his hand tighten around his pen. The officer beside him shook her head as if unable to believe it. And I just stood there, staring at Dylan through the glass. He was no longer my brother. He was the monster who killed our parents, left Jaden in terror, and destroyed everything our family had. I turned away, unable to look any longer. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them. Rage and grief burned together in me, an unquenchable fire. I wanted to scream at Dylan, to demand why he could do this to our own family. But I knew no answer would ease this pain. Matthew stepped out, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Jackson," he said, his voice softer now. "We'll bring him to justice. And you should prepare to identify your parents' bodies at the morgue." I nodded faintly, my heart empty. I didn't know how to face this loss. My parents were gone, and Dylan, the brother I once knew, had taken them from me. Dylan's trial took place just a few weeks later. I didn't attend. I couldn't face his face, couldn't hear his horrific confession again. Matthew updated me over the phone, his voice steady but laced with empathy. Dylan was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He would spend the rest of his days behind bars, paying for the crime he committed. But that sentence didn't bring my parents back, didn't erase the painful memories Jaden carried, and didn't mend the cracks in my heart. I arranged my parents' funeral on a quiet afternoon in Reno. The small church our family used to attend on weekends was filled with people, neighbors, friends, and regular customers from the grocery store. They came to pay their respects, bringing white chrysanthemums and heartfelt condolences. Mrs. Carter, the elderly neighbor, held my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Joseph and Marilyn were good people, Jackson," she said. "They didn't deserve this." I could only nod, unable to speak, afraid that if I opened my mouth I'd break down. The funeral was somber, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the oak trees in the cemetery and the murmur of prayers. I stood before their graves, feeling like the world had collapsed, but I forced myself to be strong. For Jaden. After the funeral, I took Jaden to live with me. Before my parents' graves, I knelt, placing my hand on the cold headstones, and whispered, "I promise to take care of Jaden like my own son. I won't let him suffer anymore." The wind blew, carrying a strange sense, as if my parents were listening, smiling from somewhere far away. I took Jaden's hand, leading him away from the cemetery, and in that moment I knew this was a promise I would keep at all costs. The first days in Las Vegas weren't easy. Jaden was still haunted by what had happened. He woke up crying every night, calling for his grandparents. I held him close, singing the lullabies Mom used to sing, though my voice cracked with tears. "I'm here, Jaden," I whispered. "I won't leave you alone." I spent every spare moment with him, playing, telling stories, trying to bring some light back to his eyes, still shadowed by darkness. Slowly, with patience and love, Jaden began to smile again. His smiles were faint, but to me they were like sunlight breaking through a storm. I decided to sell the grocery store and the house in Reno. Those places held too many painful memories. I couldn't keep them, couldn't let those memories continue to trap us. The money from the sales wasn't much, but it was enough to start a new life for Jaden and me. I moved us into a larger apartment in Las Vegas with a room just for him, where I hung his drawings and placed his worn teddy bear on the bed. In the months that followed, as Jaden and I settled into our new rhythm, I began to reflect on my family. My parents had made mistakes, spoiling Dylan too much, letting him become selfish and broken. Their favoritism left deep wounds, not just for me, but for them and Jaden too. But I also realized that despite our family's flaws and fractures, love and responsibility were the foundation that held us together. I learned a painful lesson. Blind indulgence and neglect can push a child down a destructive path, even to tragedy. But I also believed that with love and responsibility, I could save a life, Jaden's life. One evening, as the neon lights of Las Vegas lit up the sky, I held Jaden's hand, walking him down a bustling street. He pointed at the lights, giggling at a fountain that changed colors. I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I felt a stillness in my heart. No more nightmares, no more echoes of Dylan's shouts, no more painful memories of Reno. Just me and Jaden, uncle and nephew, walking together under the bright, hopeful glow of this city. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jaden would still have nights when he woke crying, and I would carry the scars of what Dylan did. But I was determined to build a new family, one without violence, favoritism, or betrayal. A family built on love, where Jaden could grow up without fear, where I could keep my promise to my parents and to myself. As we stopped by a fountain, Jaden looked up at me, his eyes sparkling. "Uncle Jax, can I stay with you forever?" he asked, his voice small but full of hope. I knelt down, hugged him, and smiled, though tears welled in my eyes. "Forever, Jaden," I said. "You and me, we're family." Our story closed under the radiant lights of Las Vegas, but in my heart, there was only stillness and resolve. I would not let our family's tragedy repeat. I would give Jaden the life he deserved, and I would honor the meaning of family, not through blind indulgence, but through love and responsibility. That was the legacy I wanted to leave, not just for Jaden, but for my parents, who loved us, however imperfectly.